We survived the Aries eclipse. We are midway through Mercury retrograde, and we are just going through retrograde season, eclipse season, and living to tell the tale. Here we are. And I feel like this week coming up is all about processing the downloads and experiences that we've had over the course of the week leading up to and following the eclipse, along with some of the substantial transits that happened last week, and really putting it into practice in a lot of ways, seeing how we can kind of ground these downloads in reality through our actions, our routines, implementations, and things like that, considering that the eclipse was, this amplified version of a new moon, of this new cosmic cycle that we can choose to enter into if we, if it feels aligned. Speaking of which, I'd love to hear in the comment section how your eclipse time was, and I'll tell you a bit about mine maybe near the end of the video. It was pretty spectacular. Went to the path of totality, drove for 4 days straight, round trip just to see it, and it was more than worth it. But anyway, hello, my friends. It is Alina, your local friendly astrologer, and we are going to be talking about the week ahead. I'll be giving you a horoscope, and that will be for April 15th to the 21st. So with that said, let's dive in. But before we do, I wanted to remind y'all that this video is sponsored by Auraline, which is my company, and we not only manufacture, produce, I write and create annual astrology planners, wall calendars, and general astrology stationery, but we are also hosting our very first annual Auraline retreat in Thailand, where I will be personally co-hosting workshops that are all about different modalities of astrology. So you'll be going on this trip with fellow astrology and spiritual growth loving nerds. And we will also be doing a bunch of incredible excursions, exploring Thailand culturally, but also, geographically. But with that said, let's dive in. So first up, on Monday, we see that the moon will be entering the sign of Leo, which really imbues it and imbues the day along with the next 3 days that it will be transiting Leo, so Monday through Wednesday, with an air of expressiveness, allowing us to have an easier time tapping into our inner child, our inner sense of expression. I feel like Leo brings in these themes of who are you outside of societal conditioning? Like, who were you as a child, and what aspects of yourself as a child do you still hold within you that maybe you already embody, no matter who you're around or whatever societal conditioning is, but what aspects of those, whether you are already present or maybe that you kind of hide away. I feel like when the moon, which is this astral body that directly impacts our inner world when it's transiting Leo, it offers us a very supportive time for expressing ourselves, tapping into our courage, recognizing and holding space for the importance of letting our inner voice speak in a lot of ways. And considering that the moon, or Monday, is ruled by the moon, the moon transiting Leo right now is more potently felt in a lot of ways. And in general, Mondays, moon day, is a great time for tapping into our inner world, our inner emotions, and our intuitive abilities, really checking in with ourselves emotionally. I feel like I also personally, on Mondays, I like to, if I can, if time permits, I just really love meal prepping and doing things that are nourishing to me and my partner in that way. Like, what is nourishing to me? And whether it's, preparing food, it might be listening to a really insightful podcast where I'm learning, or any form of nourishment for you can be really great. And considering that there's that extra layer of the moon being in Leo, I feel like Monday specifically, but really Monday through Wednesday, can be a great time for being expressive, whether that's through a medium where maybe you're transmuting your emotions or your intuitive senses, transmuting what you've been feeling, whether that's through articulating it, artistic expression, creative expression, anything like that. Also, I feel like in the context of us being post-Aries eclipse, and I feel like I like to call it like an eclipse hangover, I feel like now is also a great time for taking time to kind of process any of the downloads or informations, or for me, information. And I feel like for me, for me, it's processing the patterns that I've noticed and I've picked up on over the course of this eclipse time, really like 1 week leading up to 1 week following it. And you'll see that in the transits coming up, there will be these opportunities, and you might experience this week, these moments where it feels a bit easier to implement or put into action or kind of ground ourselves, kind of bring these downloads from the ether down into the material world reality through grounding them in our actions or our routines, or creating some sort of structure or actual aligned steps with what we've been kind of realizing or processing lately. Okay, the next day, Tuesday, we know is ruled by Mars. So in general, Tuesday can be a very potent day for being in action, taking aligned steps with any intentions that we might have set maybe on Sunday or Monday, the start of the week. In general, it's just a really supportive day for taking action, because we know that Mars is the planet of taking initiative, action, dominance, force, things like that. Really energy, very masculine, being in action type of energy. And so that is the general sort of foundation that we see on Tuesday. We also see that the moon in Leo will be opposing Pluto in Aquarius on Tuesday, the 16th. So when we see this type of opposition between the moon and Pluto, we can see, especially considering what signs that they're transiting, there can be a higher potential, because the thing also, let me give some context. So as we already know, the moon directly impacts our inner world, our emotions, what's going on internally, how we process things. And then Pluto is really all about bringing things to light, revelations, like tapping into our intuition and bringing truth to light, and that being a function of change, And considering that they're in this opposition aspect where they're on the opposite sides of the zodiac wheel, and they're basically in this type of transit where we're being called to strike a balance between the aspects, the areas of our lives that these planets influence. So when we see this type of transit, we usually see potential sort of revelations and new information coming to light, specifically when it comes to our relationships. And I think that it specifically will likely have to do with inner child wounds, and really our personal shadow sides coming to light, either ours or others, where we either get this clarity about ourselves of like, oh, like this is something, or somebody might even point it out to us. And there might be something a bit triggering about it as well, in that it's through that trigger that we realize like, wait, where is this coming from? And it's basically this sort of function. It serves this function of us being able to tap deeper into the source of why we're reacting a certain way with one another. And I think that it specifically, considering that the moon will be in Leo, it likely might have something to do with aspects of ourselves and how we navigate life with these shadows, and this clarity of how it's not serving us anymore, or it's maybe not serving somebody else anymore. So the moon in Leo really imbues this sense of warmth and exuberance and this calling for recognition, and Pluto in Aquarius brings in themes of showcasing and kind of revealing our shadows and what maybe isn't working anymore, specifically when it comes to the collective. So there's these themes around holding space for ourselves and our needs, as well as being considerate of the collective, being considerate of the people around us. And specifically, there's an aspect of it that is really all about like the collective maybe having these shadow issues, or something being revealed there where it seems like maybe you or someone around you is trying to bring light to the truth in some way. And so I feel like on a collective level, we will likely see this, especially in terms of like, there's like a lot of war stuff going on. There's a lot of geopolitical stuff going on that's directly connected to us in the US. For example, we see what's happening in Palestine right now and how it's directly connected with us in the US in terms of our tax dollars funding that, right? And a lot of people this awareness is being brought to so many people having to do with that. And there being this question of like, I want to speak my truth. We want to speak our truth. We want our voices to be heard in considering that our tax dollars are being used. Like, let's talk about this. Like, let's actually hold space for the collective's perspective of it. And that being maybe like the more Leo energy. And then there's these shadows coming up, right? These like things that are being revealed of like, ooh, this isn't as balanced and perfect and equitable and by the book as what was sold to us in a lot of ways for a long time. And so I think that things might be coming up internationally within that space. And I think that it's really important for us all to be educated on what's going on there because, again, we are connected to it. I don't want to dive too deep into that, but that's something that comes to mind on the collective level. Another thing that comes to mind is codependence. On a more interpersonal level, sometimes, I don't know about y'all, I just like just these themes of like what's coming up is like people pleaser, codependent type of energy of striking this balance of like, oh, I want to support other people in this way. But I also, Moon and Leo bring in these themes of like, hold space for your voice as well. But I also need to pay attention to what's going on with me, you know? And so I feel like those themes are going on and they will likely be most potently felt on Tuesday. Next, Wednesday, we don't see any major transits happening, but we do see that Wednesday is ruled by Mercury. So it's really this day of communication, information exchange, learning, asking questions, sharing information, and all things out of the air. So think the internet, think travel, all of these things. Wednesday can be a great day, say if you're looking to book a trip or plan something out in terms of travel. It can be a great day to kind of organize that with your people, if you're doing it in a group aspect or get information about it. And we also see that the moon will still be transiting Leo. This will be the last day. Next, on Thursday, again, we don't have any major transits, but you'll see in the next few days, they're all piling up near the weekend. But Thursday is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of luck and expansion. Thursday in general is a great day for doing anything that you're looking to have a little bit of luck around. So maybe it's like, oh, I want to ask somebody out, or I'm going to apply for this thing, or I'm going to do this interview, or anything like that. Thursdays in general can be a great day for scheduling that. And we see that the moon will be entering the sign of Virgo. So Virgo is this earth sign. And when the moon is transiting it, which it will be for the next 3 days through Saturday, my bad, it can imbue and make it a little bit easier for us to, when we're tapping into our inner world, that being, you know, the space that the moon strongly impacts, it can feel a little bit easier to kind of organize things and have this grounded clarity around things of like, okay, I understand who I am, or I understand my limitations, or I understand, like, there's also, if you want to do anything in terms of like organizing, think like spring cleaning, anything like that, finding balance, whether that's on an internal level through, you know, processing your emotions, or if it's like in your physical space, because, you know, as above, so below, there's not just on that from that spiritual perspective, as within, so without, but also psychologically, it's already been proven in so many different ways that our exterior world really influences our interior, you know, our inner world in a lot of ways. And so organizing, cleaning, things like that can be conducive around this time, very energetically supported as well. Oh, I also want to say that in terms of relationships, especially if anything has been coming up with these previous transits. So for example, Pluto and the moon, that transit, or even during retrograde, you know, retrograde is all about bringing up old relationships, bringing up old patterns as well, like kind of bringing that to the forefront of your mind to finally learn that lesson. We're still in retrograde. With the moon being in Virgo, it can definitely lend itself to being supportive when it comes to working through things in relationships as well, and being able to clearly articulate like where you're coming from and seeking balance and seeking some level of like structure there, some level of like consistency. All right. I think Friday will be the most notable day out of the week. And that's because we see that Mercury will be conjuncting with Venus in the sign of Aries, both of them in Aries. And considering that Friday is ruled by Venus, this transit will likely be more potently felt on this day. So in general, Fridays can be a great day for doing anything romantic, having any sort of relationship conversations, and doing anything that fortifies, strengthens, nourishes our relationships. And they can be from a romantic perspective, but they can be platonic, friendships, anything like that. Fridays can be a great day to do stuff like that. So if you're kind of waiting for a day like that, I think it can be great. Also considering that the moon will be in Virgo, I think that, again, very nourishing energy when it comes to our relationships and also even nourishing our bodies, I'd say. But going back to Mercury conjuncting Venus, when we see that they come together in general, I'll talk about generally when they have this type of conjunction, and then I'll talk about them being in Aries. Oh, by the way, I feel like this might be helpful. You can just go on any app, any astrology app, and find out what house Mercury is transiting in Aries, since it's in Aries right now, like what house it's transiting in your charts, to see more specifically what area of life what I'm talking about will be directly influencing. You can do it on any app, but if you want to, my last video where I talked about the eclipse, I talked about Mercury retrograde, and I talked about for each sign what house it will be transiting. I talk about it in terms of like terms of the retrograde, but I also but it can still be applied to this because now Venus will also be in that sign as well. So anyway, generally speaking, when Mercury conjuncts with Venus, it can bring, especially in Aries, it can bring this very direct nature to how we express ourselves, because we see that Mercury is all about communication, information exchange, articulating our inner world, learning, educating one another, things like that, all things out of air. And Venus is all about love and relationships, you know, our connections, and even like finances and things like that, but most importantly, our relationships. And so when they come together, it's almost like Mercury offers its skills and articulation to the areas of our lives involving our relationships. And so it can feel a little bit easier for us to communicate with one another. Now, considering that Mercury is retrograde, I personally think that what can happen here is that there might be a potential where past love interests, past friendships, past connections of the heart. So I'm not talking about, you know, like a mundane, like, oh, I collaborated with this person like 4 years ago or whatever. That might show up, but I think it's more likely connections of the heart. That doesn't necessarily mean romantic, but like people you've had deep connections with. Either they might come back into your lives, or potential hiccups or issues within the relationship might rear their head at some point, whether that was at the eclipse or anytime throughout this retrograde period. And conversations around that, where we're getting very direct, are more likely to come up around this transit. So I would say a few days leading up to and following it, as well as on Friday. And I think that despite Mercury being retrograde, I think that it still can lend itself to offering us a bit, making it feel a little bit easier to find the words that we've been needing to say to the people in our lives that maybe we've been needing to say it. Or maybe you might get a call or a text from somebody where they're like, hey, I want to say this. And I think that also, whether it's in a conversation or not, I think that there can just be this mental clarity around the state of things, like, you know, and the dynamics of things in our relationships, for sure. And going back to the fact that it will be in Aries, on one side of the coin, I think that we as a collective will feel very direct in expressing how we feel about things. And I think that on a collective level, that might even look like potential like protests or taking action in some way where on a collective level, we're feeling like we can very directly communicate what we think about things, community-wise, statewide, nationally, and beyond. So look out for that. I feel like that might pop up, and it will likely be very passionate, very fiery, because it's an Aries. But on the other side of the coin, there could be potential arguments and short fuses, and like short tempers. Tempers can run high. When we see that this type of transit happens in the sign of Aries, as we know, anger, frustration, all of those are secondary emotions. They're usually tied to something else where it's like, oh, I feel hurt, I feel unseen, I feel whatever. And then it's like the ego part of us wants to defend, you know, I need to defend myself. So I feel like when Aries is at play, when we see planets transiting it, it's easier for us to hop to that secondary emotion versus pausing to hold space for the root of it and where it's coming from. So my advice, especially throughout this week, especially considering all these planets transiting Aries around this time, is leaning into pausing to process and tap into, really literally ask yourself, if you're feeling upset, what's the secondary emotion here? Or not secondary, that's the secondary emotion. What's the first emotion here? Like, what's the root of what I'm feeling that is eliciting me feeling defensive, or maybe with others. If people are getting snappy with you, maybe setting some boundaries until they can be in a space where they can be respectful at the very least. You know, we can't control everybody else's emotions. We can't expect everybody to immediately tap into emotional intelligence and be like, all right, now that I thought about it, I'm going to express to you my deeper feeling of feeling pain and feeling sad and blah, blah, blah. You know, not everybody, you know, is able to do that. So it's like holding space what can be, while also maintaining boundaries so that you don't get disrespected. Because let me tell you, there's a potential for that. So just keep that in mind. We also see on Friday that the sun will be entering the sign of Taurus, marking the beginning of Taurus season. So happy birthday to all of my Taurus friends. Whether you are sun, moon, and rising, we appreciate you. We appreciate the aspects of stability that you imbue, the aspects of indulgence. I feel like my Taurus friends, a big aspect of my Taurus friends and even family members that I love is that I feel like a lot of times y'all give, by you being yourself, and kind of like indulging in your emotions, indulging in how you feel, indulging in what you love, whether that's, you know, food. I know it's a cliche to talk about how Taurus people love food, but like indulging in what you love and being you. I feel like by you doing that, you indirectly give permission to other people around you to also be ourselves, because we see you holding space for yourself. And it just immediately, I feel like whenever I'm around a Taurus, it's not all, right? But a lot of the close ones in my life, I immediately don't feel very judged because I feel like they hold space to indulge in who they are. So anyway, so happy birthday to y'all. But when we see that the sun enters Taurus, basically over the next 28, 29 days, generally the next month, there's this underlying theme of grounding ourselves, of seeking stability and consistency. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, it's very interesting. And also over this time is all about relationships as well, and the power of relationships in our lives when it comes to being grounded in who we are, grounding in our comfort, grounding in our sense of self relative to our community. You know, we are community-based organisms. It's very potent and powerful to be independent and on your own in any way. And that's very, you know, important. And I got a few comments in the last video, or one of my videos, when I was talking about relationships a lot. And some of them were saying like, I'm doing this all on my own and I don't need to, you know, tap into my relationships with people. And that's great. And I agree with you. Absolutely. But, you know, all relationships are mirrors, and they all serve a purpose of us reflecting back to others as a lesson, and other people reflecting back to us as a lesson. And so, and really all of life is relationships in a lot of ways. You know, no man is an island, but I do understand that perspective as well. But anyway, let me get back to Taurus season. But Taurus season is, and by the way, if you hear my cat, she's being melodramatic right now. She has a toy in her hand and I'm going to play with her in a second. Anyway, but when we see the sun transiting Taurus in Taurus season, it's a great time for grounding any intentions that we set, whether that was at the beginning of the zodiac season or maybe this Aries new moon. This is one of the reasons why I feel like this week is this really potent time for really bringing the downloads and the ideas and the connections that we've made down into, from the ether down into the present world through the actions that we take, whether that's literally writing it down, making it matter. It's literally matter now. It's on a piece of paper, writing it on a wall. And that's not like, maybe it doesn't necessarily need to be like brand new intentions all the time or whatever. Maybe it's, oh, I learned this thing about myself and now I have this clarity and I'm going to write it down and acknowledge and remember and really integrate and implement it into my life. Because sometimes we can, and I feel like you might hear this experience with people who have these moments of enlightenment in a lot of ways, where they learn this incredible thing and they go back to the real world and they're like, dang, like nothing changed. And the overarching thing there is that it's not just about learning this insight or getting this download or having this epiphany or making these connections or learning this lesson. It's not just about learning the lesson. It's about actually putting it into action and having, and you know, and being in action or taking aligned steps with it. And so my point is that Taurus season and the sun entering Taurus is offering us a lot of energetic support when it comes to being in action and taking aligned steps. And considering the phase that the moon will be in following the new moon, that it will be in its waxing period right now, where it's building light, building momentum to its energetic peak at the full moon. There's, again, like there's lunar, solar support when it comes to thinking about what's my action plan, like what's my first step, second step, like how can I seek support maybe. There's a lot of that energy there. Yeah, and in general, this time can be a really great time for implementing or prioritizing our rituals, routines, and the relationships that help to co-create and foster safe environments for us to grow and be who we want to be. And another sort of comparison I can give is if Aries season is about springing up and being in action, you know, it's a spring season here in the Northern Hemisphere, Taurus season is about slowing down a bit and getting grounded, grounding our actions. You know how sometimes you get a spark of inspiration and you're like, ooh, I just want to do it and I want to go and I want to do this. Taurus is about, okay, yeah, let's be in action. And there's still a lot of energy there. It's still this new zodiac year, but how am I going to do this in a sustainable way? Also on Friday, and like I mentioned before, you know, Friday is really a huge day out of the week, astrologically. So much stuff is happening. We see that Mars in Pisces will be sextiling Uranus in Taurus. This is the type of transit that it's like taking a shot of espresso right before you're about to sit down and sort of tackle some complex tasks in your life. And the reason why I say that is because we see Mars, the planet of action, drive, initiative, and sort of like dominance and taking the first step. And it's in the very intuitive sign of Pisces. So really tapping into our inner world, there being more action and energy within that aspect of our lives. And it's having this very supportive and mutually sort of bolstering sextile with Uranus, which is the planet of change, breakthroughs, and sort of having very forward-thinking perspectives to sort of initiate that change. It's going to be in the sign of Taurus, this earth sign that has a lot to do with our relationships and our finances. And so when we see this type of transit, it can be very beneficial in a lot of ways in that we feel like we want to be in action, but it can also feel a little bit uncomfy because we are tackling areas of our lives that Uranus influences. So a lot of change, unexpected change, and potential sort of breakthroughs mentally where we're like, we might find this clarity and we're like, oh, I need to be in action in alignment with this change. Like there's this calling within us. And I feel like on Friday, a few days leading up to, a few days following, it's so crazy how a lot of this is lining up. These very action-oriented transits, a lot of them involving our relationships. I feel like this week there's likely going to be a bit of shakeup within our relationships, whether it's on an interpersonal level or a global or even national level when it comes to like relations as well. Like international relations between countries or things like that. That's what's coming up for me. I think that especially on like an interpersonal level, we might experience this drive and this spike of energy when it comes to finally tackling things within our relationships and also maybe in our finances and kind of organizing things. We might experience something maybe for good. I think that it might have to do with taxes for a lot of us where we're like, ooh, that deadline's coming up. So I'm having this like spark of like, I need to be in action and go through it. So sometimes it might be something where we feel good and happy and excited to do it, but it also might be an experience where we're kind of pushed into being in action. And considering again that the moon is still transiting Virgo, and so it's in this sign that is all about reviewing things, kind of judging things, being meticulous about things, and improving upon things so that they feel balanced and seeking perfection in a lot of ways. And so anyway, considering that, you know, Mars is having this sextile with Uranus and bringing in this sense of action, and the moon being in Virgo, I just think that there's going to be a lot of action, and it's going to be rooted in like grounding. There's going to be we're going to have a lot of inner conversations around and it being rooted in like, I want to just be in a structured, consistent place. And so I'm going to take action tackling potential change in my life in order to get there. So just to review, on Friday, April 19th, we have Mercury conjuncting Venus in Aries. We have the sun entering the sign of Taurus, and we have Mars conjuncting Uranus. And you know, the moon will be in Virgo. So overall, I think that this is a very potent day out of the entire week that will be all about taking action, looking to strike balance and order within our relationships, and holding space for our inner world and maybe this inner calling for that to happen. And also these actions that we're taking being in the direction and in alignment with themes of getting grounded, like grounding ourselves, like finally feeling settled, finally feeling like we're in a routine of something where there's some structure and consistency to the actions that we're doing. And I think a lot of it will involve our relationships, our finances, things that feel complex to us, and us finally feeling like we can be in action to get things in order. Next, on April 20th, we go into Saturday, which is Saturn Day, day ruled by Saturn, and it's all about it's basically a great day for taking aligned steps with lessons that we are being called to learn in this life. Saturn is considered the strict teacher in astrology. Yeah, it's basically imbuing Saturday with this overall theme where we're supported when we take actions that are in alignment with our responsibilities and our commitments, and yeah, lessons that we're being called to learn. And so considering following, you know, Friday where there's all this action-oriented energy with Mars having this transit with Uranus, it's really interesting. I just think that there's going to be a lot of energy, a lot of action going on right now. But we also see that on Saturday, Jupiter will be conjuncting with Uranus, both in the sign of Taurus. So I think that this can be potentially pretty good in that it can take the pre-existing transit between Mars and Uranus and make it a little bit more benefic, a little bit more expansive, potentially positive, potentially lucky in a lot of ways. Because when we see that Jupiter comes together, when we see Jupiter come together in a conjunction with Uranus, it can bring this air of luck and expansion to any changes that we are experiencing in our lives, any sort of innovation or new approach that we have to things, or new perspectives that we have to things. The thing about Uranus too is that it's connected with rapid change as well. So I think that on Saturday, you know, this day that is ruled by Saturn and that is connected to these responsibilities and these things that we're called to learn, and considering that Mars will be also playing a role with Uranus along with Jupiter, there's a lot of things around change. There's a lot of themes around being in action. I feel like we're likely going to have an experience that is calling us to be in action and calling us to really, yeah, basically play a role in some sort of change, whether that's like somebody calling you up and being like, hey, there's going to be this change in our routine, or like this change in our dynamic in some way. And basically, yeah, but with Jupiter playing a role, there's this air of whatever happens, it's in alignment with us expanding in some way, expanding our awareness, expanding our perspective, but really in a lucky way, expanding what we already have. And considering that this will also be in the sign of Taurus, you know, Jupiter and Uranus will be coming together in Taurus, I think that there's a lot of rewarding, expansive, and lucky energy when we take actions that are in alignment with our financial literacy, our financial health. Again, things like taxes, taking initiative in that space can be alignment with, will definitely be to our benefit. There's a lot of lucky energy when we take grounded, consistent steps in alignment with our responsibilities and with kind of maturing, having a mature perspective around these things. Oh yeah, and we also see that on Saturday, the moon will be entering Libra. And Libra is all about relationships, equitability, balance, justice within relationships as well. So I do think that, yeah, actions that are in alignment with, yeah, equitability within relationships as well will be very potent and helpful. I think that what also comes to mind is really asking for help. especially if it has to do with finances. So like maybe that's working with like a financial person, bookkeeper, tax person, or just like literally going online, watching videos and learning from other people. That can be very helpful as well. But especially when it comes to relationships, I think that Saturday and this weekend is gonna be all about changes within relationships, changes within certain dynamics, and stepping up to the plate in terms of taking responsibility and aligned actions with the changes that we might be experiencing around this time. And finally, on Sunday, April 21st, we will see that Sunday is ruled by the sun, Sunday, and it's a day of exuberance, taking initiative, leadership, shining bright, and also just illuminating ourselves, illuminating things for others, and really vitality. When you think of the rising sun and the sun in general, what it does is it brings this vitality to the world. And so I think it's no coincidence that I said this before, that we have religious gatherings and stuff like that on Sunday. But we also see that the sun in Taurus will be squaring Pluto in Aquarius. And when we see this type of aspect, considering that the sun that impacts our sense of self, our ego, our expression, you know, sun is the ruling planet of Leo, so a lot of those things as well. Seeing that the sun is transiting Taurus, this like really grounded sign, and then also it's having the square aspect with Pluto. This Pluto is really about revelations, revealing shadow aspects of ourselves, our spirituality in a lot of ways. And it's in the sign of Aquarius. That's very innovative. There can be these themes on Sunday and throughout the weekend, the beginning of next week, where we're being asked to strike a balance between our comfort zone, that being the more Taurus energy, and leaving our comfort zone. Also between things like predictability, that being the Taurus energy, and innovation, that being the more Aquarius energy. And maybe between balancing things like tradition and new approaches. And again, like I really feel like this week, there's a lot of themes around restructuring relationships, restructuring our relationship, maybe even to like finances. There being a lot of changes with the strong Uranus transits, but also us being able to clearly articulate and have this clarity around how we feel about it, and being able to speak up for ourselves and make sure that our voices are heard. And I think that on one side of the coin, that can show up as a bit of anger and potential arguments of people trying to push to get their perspective heard. But I think that if we're open to, and I talked about this earlier, open to tapping into not the secondary emotion of anger or frustration, but what's the root of that? Like, are we feeling pain, sadness, feeling let down? Like, what's really going on there? And if we're open to really expressing it and working through it, again, that Mars energy, that can be very helpful. And considering that on Sunday, we're having this transit where we're being invited to hold space for our inner voice and maybe even like our shadow side, and striking that balance between like predictability and potential change and evolution and all of these things. Sunday will be a time where we're kind of processing the week where we might have noticed change, or we kind of got this news. I feel like some of us are really throughout this week might be getting some new news where we're basically being told, oh, you know how you thought things were? They're actually very different, and you need to buckle up and step into how things actually are. Like the universe is kind of asking for us to grapple with reality in some ways in this changing of perspectives a bit. And I think that on Sunday, when we have this square between the sun and Pluto, it's going to be a time for us to make some choices and get clear on like, well, what path do I want to take considering this new information? Do I want to stick to my comfort zone, stick to what's consistent? And maybe that might work for you. Maybe it's like, there might be an experience where somebody or something in the world is asking us to change, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to stick to what I know and maybe circle back to this. That might show up for some of us. And it also might show up as maybe you asking other people like, hey, this is my reality and we're kind of co-creating this reality, and I'd like there to be change here. And there being maybe an upset or a difference of opinion. And on Sunday, there's a square, which is usually not like, it's kind of like a harder type of transit because it's like the sun and Pluto are kind of like knocking heads a bit. But that square is what can often produce tension that we need to kind of be in action in a lot of ways. So there can be something constructive to that. And considering that the moon is transiting Libra right now, there's so many themes about our relationships right now. And making sure that our voice is heard and holding space for what we want and navigating basically our personal needs, the collective needs, and then also consistency, structure, and potential change and upheaval. And again, going back to the eclipse and me saying that I feel like this week is going to have a lot of themes around us having like an eclipse hangover and us processing things and putting things to action. Sometimes when you start to change and want to put things in action or want to take aligned steps with this new information, it's not always easy because sometimes people around us aren't ready for that change, or vice versa. Maybe there's people around you that you're noticing are ready for change, or collectively there's some shifts happening and we're not fully ready for it, or it's taking time for us to really process it. I feel like this week is about processing things. Anyway, that concludes my video for this weekly horoscope. Please comment down below and let me know if this resonates with you. Please, I'd love to hear your eclipse stories. How was last week for y'all? And actually, to wrap this up, I will tell you my eclipse story. So Chris, my husband, and I, we decided to be eclipse chasers. I'm gonna give you the Cliff Notes version because there's a lot of details. But basically, we got to visit some family in New Mexico, and it was really great. And then the next day, we were gonna take the day Sunday, the day before the eclipse, we were gonna drive from New Mexico to Austin, Texas, which would have been like 12 plus hours. But that morning, we got definitive information that the forecast that it would potentially be overcast, and even there might even be thunderstorms across the entire path of totality within Texas. So we were like, all right, let's find somewhere else. Long story short, we decided to go to this small town in Arkansas, and boy, oh boy, was the experience incredible. We thought that we were just gonna stay there, see the eclipse, it would be incredible as is, and then we'd go home. But we ended up learning about this huge event that was being hosted there that had been planned for months in advance, where there was a Beatles tribute band, and there were, food trucks and activities. There was even like this like portable escape room that was in a trailer. Very interesting. But notably, what they also had was a mass wedding ceremony under the eclipse, y'all. Incredible. And so we went and we were like, okay, this sounds cool, but maybe it's going to be a few couples. No, y'all. It was, I don't even know how many women were in, people were in wedding dresses, full on wedding gowns, formal attire. Some of them had bridesmaids, groomsmen, like a whole wedding party. And it was just so fascinating. And we were there just enjoying it, being grateful to just be able to witness this. Like, imagine the light is dimming as the eclipse is coming closer and everybody's reciting their vows. That's what happened. But what was even crazier was that they invited anybody who's already married to renew their vows under the eclipse as a part of the wedding ceremony. And Chris and I, we were already in the mode of like, kind of like, that mode of like, F it. Like, let's do it. We were already in that mode by kind of choosing to go on this road trip, choosing to kind of be in this rock and roll mode, and then also choosing to change routes completely, literally driving to a brand new state. We drove through New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas, and then Arkansas, and so we were like, let's do this. So we did it, and it was incredible, y'all. Like, I'm looking into the eyes of my husband as we're reciting these vows, and it felt so good. It felt so aligned. I know that's for many people in astrology, there's, a lot of perspectives of like, oh, the eclipse, like you should stay indoors and don't look at it. And there's a lot of negative connotations around it. Understandably, I respect that. But our experience felt so divinely aligned. We had gotten married officially like 6 months ago. We had our whole wedding ceremony back in September. And so anyway, we were looking into each other's eyes, the like, it's getting darker in the sky. There's this haze to everything and this change in hue as well, in color. So it's already incredibly surreal. And then I look around, y'all, and there are brides and grooms crying, looking into one another's eyes, because this is their wedding. This is their wedding. And there's already this intensity and this energy in the air. The air is thick with this potent mass wedding, experience. Like, you're literally around people going through these emotions and you can feel it. It's palpable. And yeah, we recited our vows. We even, took off our rings and exchanged them again. And it just felt so aligned. And then after that, right after that was totality. So we got to sit down and watch it. And y'all, first off, I want to say, I feel like all the news reports in the US are like, this isn't going to happen again in 40 years. That is true. But it's important to remember that solar eclipses actually happen very often. It's just that most of the time they happen over the ocean because the majority of the surface of the earth is ocean. And then, and then also they just happen in other countries. They just don't report on it. So there's actually going to be there's going to be one happening in Brazil, somewhere in South America coming up within the next year or so. There's going to be a bunch. So if you want to see this, you can do it. If you want to maybe schedule your vacations around it, it's possible. But the experience that we had was so incredibly surreal because I'm sure many of you know the sun, it's so powerful that the moon can be over 98% covering the sun, and it still looks like it's dusk. And it isn't until it fully covers it that it immediately gets dark. It happens so rapidly. And to literally look into the sky, the best way I can describe it is you're looking into the sky and you're quite literally witnessing a black hole in the sky. There's no other time in our lives where we can look directly at the sun and it produces no damage to our eyes. And this is scientifically proven and studied, but also you don't feel anything looking at it. It's so incredible. And it was more than worth the trip, in my opinion. And if you have the opportunity to do it and you see it, there's a path and you can take it, y'all. And the last thing I'll say to kind of wrap this up of how incredibly serendipitous the whole experience was. We were supposed to be in Austin. We weren't supposed to be a part of a mass wedding ceremony, y'all. After the eclipse, the first song that they had a Beatles tribute band, which was kind of crazy. It was really random. The first song that they played after the eclipse, complete and the sun came back was, I'll let y'all guess, Here Comes the Sun. And that, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. That was the song that I walked down the aisle to for our wedding, walking down the aisle to Chris. So it just felt very serendipitous, very clandestine, very divinely aligned. And it was rough, the 3-day road trip through all these states, it wasn't happy and cozy the whole time because, you're in a car for so long, but it was more than worth it in my opinion. And we could have flown too, but we really couldn't have because the prices of flights, that's why we did the road trip. But it ended up being so great because we got to visit family along the way, there and back. And so anyway, that's my eclipse story. I'd love to hear yours. And I'm just sending y'all my love. And again, if you are thinking about going on the Auraline retreat, we would love to have you. And I would be more than happy to even hop on a call and talk about the eclipse, the retreat, if you're seriously considering coming. And I can answer literally any question that you have, any detail. So go on the website, click the link in my bio to learn more about it. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to fill out the contact form or message me on Instagram, anywhere, and we will get to talking. But because for example, this conversation about the eclipse, it's just so fun to nerd out with one another. And that's just this added unique layer that I don't really see any other retreats offering, where we're going and we're geeking out about astrology, but we're also going on an adventure and going on hikes and doing all this fun stuff in Thailand together. With all of that said, I will wrap up this video with my favorite quote, and that is, be gentle with yourself, because life is about the journey and not the destination. All right, I'll see you on the next one.